Hey, my name is Nick David West, Vice President of the Entrepreneurship Club.
I'm Giovanni Ritato, part of the Entrepreneurship Club.
Today we're here with Steve Ergel.
Good afternoon. My name is Steve Ergel. I'm managing partner of Fort Worth Royalty Company. I'm a partner at the law firm of Beckham, Rector, and Ergel, and I'm chairman of the board of NBT Financial.
Nice to have you here today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. So the first question I want to ask you is, what inspired you to specialize in oil and gas and law?
Well, I grew up in East Texas in Tyler, and I went to school at the University of Texas, and I was trying to just figure out what to do with my career. I was a marketing major, but the marketing opportunities that were before me were not that interesting to me. At the time, I just wanted to make some money, move back to Tyler, and open up a sporting goods store, and I was going to call it Big Steve's, and that's about as much thought as I'd put into it. So that was my original goal.
Okay.
But as I got out of school and needed to either make money or get more educated, I talked with my older brother and some other folks, mentors, if you will, and it seemed like a lot of them had gone to law school, and some of them were still practicing lawyers, but some of them were getting to do other things. So the idea of going to law school had some appeal to me. These guys encouraged me to do so, and I was kind of at a point in my life where I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. So I thought, I'm young, I'm single, it's probably a good time to go to law school and kind of get that out of the way. So I studied for the LSAT, did pretty well, got into the University of Texas School of Law, and went to school there for 3 years, and got out in 1990. And then from there, they had placement services, and different law firms would come to the university to recruit young lawyers, and I clerked with several firms, and got an opportunity to clerk one summer at a firm called Law Snakert and Gamble in Fort Worth, and that's how I moved to Fort Worth. And as a young lawyer there, I worked under a couple different partners, one of whom was a very well-regarded oil and gas attorney, a guy named Sam Denny. He was one of the deans of oil and gas law in the state of Texas, so I was able to kind of work under him and learn from him, and that's kind of how the oil and gas law developed. And there I met my current business partner, Andy Rector, as we were both young attorneys at Law Snakert back in the early 90s. In the late 90s, we split off and started our own firm, a boutique oil and gas firm, and kind of low overhead, but just worked all the time. And on nights and weekends, we started putting together royalty deals that we would purchase. So did you guys grow up playing Monopoly when you were kids?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so you know what it's like. You're out there, you're moving around the board, and you're really hoping that you land on Connecticut Avenue or St. James Place or Marvin Gardens so that you can buy them. But you only have so much money, right?
Okay.
So you end up buying everything you can and depleting your cash flow and leveraging, if you have to, just to acquire those assets, all with the hope of what?
Making more money.
Making more money, and that somebody lands on you someday.
Exactly.
So kind of in a simplistic way, that's what our royalty business was. We were out buying small royalty interest all over West Texas, California, different places. We were living very simply, probably too simply for my young bride, but we put everything, all our time and energy that we had left over on the nights and weekends into growing that royalty company. So we lived and worked out of the practice of law, which all gave us the academic ability to do our own work on the royalty business. So we started acquiring properties much like you do when you play the game of Monopoly, and started acquiring properties, and eventually, oil companies would, land on us and drill on us or have to pay us a royalty. And so eventually you start getting a little cash flow that helps you then kind of pay off some of your earlier acquisitions. But in many ways, it's a lot like the game of Monopoly. So that's how Fort Worth Royalty started.
It's amazing. That's one of my favorite games too, is Monopoly.
Yeah. You know, I read the other day that game was invented by a woman in the early 20th century, a woman who actually, and I don't know if this was true or not, but she set out with the objective of making a game that would dissuade people from capitalism, that would get them to see the evils of capitalism, and, you know, because the players, they get leveraged and they can go bankrupt, and, you know, obviously the goal of the game is to kind of be the most monopolistic and acquire the most properties, and if you're playing it right, you're driving your opponents out of business, and she kind of built that game as a way to teach the evils of capitalism, but it turned into, you know, one of the most popular games for kids growing up, at least in the United States.
Yeah, it did the exact opposite.
Did the exact opposite. Yeah, you never know about unintended consequences. That's right.
That's true. So you mentioned something about mentorship and how you had a mentor lead you into getting into law. And
yeah, Nick, I would say it was probably not any one specific person as much as it was a group of people. So my brother, I have two brothers and a sister. They're all older, and the older brother had several friends who'd gone to law school and were young professionals, and of course they're going out to eat and living big, and I'm 20 years old and thinking that's pretty cool, you know. And but some of them, you know, some of them work for law firms, some of them work for you know, in a prosecutor's office, some of them worked at oil companies, and you know, I was young and to be honest, just didn't feel like I had many skills other than the energy to go work hard for someone, and so just kind of collectively talking to several of them, and the common denominator kept being, you know, if you're not sure, why don't you go to law school for a few years and maybe figure it out from there. But that's kind of one of the things I try and pay forward is, you know, whenever I do talk to young people is, you know, one of the things I try and tell them, it's okay to be 20 years old and not know what you're going to do with the rest of your life. Quite frankly, it's okay to be 30 years old and not know what you want to do with the rest of your life. But keep working, keep showing up every morning, keep working, keep, you know, don't ever, you know, goof off. I mean, keep making money, supporting your family or paying your way or whatever, but eventually you'll figure it out. Just keep leaning in.
keep leaning in, like that.
That's very big. Yeah.
So could you tell us about some of the biggest challenges you had while growing up and going into business by yourself and business with your partner?
Yeah, I guess one of the biggest problems, kind of a couple level of problems. One is there wasn't like a book that said, here's what you do. So you really are kind of making it up as you go along. But, you know, a lot of the skills you develop as a young person, and it's not just going to school. Going to school helps. You know, I had a business degree from the University of Texas, and that had taught me a lot, but I'd also learned a lot as a kid with a paper route, throwing papers and going around and collecting the monthly bill from my customers and getting up and throwing their paper on Sunday mornings and all of that. And, you know, I remember when I was a little kid, I'd build little putt-putt courses in my backyard, and I'd charge my friends a nickel to come play, and to get them to play, I said, well, I'll share the profits with you. So I would take their nickel, and we'd all play putt-putt, and then I'd pay out their nickel in dividends. And, you know, now looking back on it, what I didn't realize is, you know, I had shareholders. I was, you know, all these little basic skills that, you know, I'm sure I was making a mess of when I was 8 and 10 years old. But those are all things that you kind of that kind of come in handy later on when you're trying to do it for real. So I guess my first challenge, to answer your question, my first challenge was kind of inward. You know, can I do this? Can we do this? Will this work? And what if it doesn't? So the what if it doesn't part was really kind of okay because we had a day job. You know, we were working, practicing law. I wasn't married yet. My business partner was married and had 2 kids. So he was playing for keeps. You know, if we failed at something, you know, I could go do something else somewhere else. But, you know, he had a wife and kids, and it was real. So the second challenge, I guess, was more exterior, which I would say was probably access to capital. I think it's hard for any entrepreneur getting started with no track record of success, with the appearance of youth that probably scares every banker. When Andy and I sourced our very first deal, it was, I'm trying to remember, it was 1993. And I want to say the deal, the total cost was $11,000, which doesn't sound like a lot of money, but back then,
It's a lot of money.
it was more. And we both had good jobs, and we were young lawyers working. I think we were each making probably $55,000 a year, and I was single, and so we wanted to borrow the money for this first royalty deal that we were going to buy. And Nick, the first 5 banks we went to told us no, told us that together we weren't worth $11,000, and that was pretty discouraging. And I realized later it wasn't so much that we were trying to borrow too much money, it was that I was trying to borrow money and give them a lien on an oil and gas royalty, which kind of scared them. They heard what I showed them in their mind was an oil and gas loan, and back in 1990, those were way out of favor because oil was down, oil was cheap. A lot of Texans had gone bankrupt in the oil business, so the type of collateral I was offering was almost radioactive to these guys. So, but the 6th bank we went to loaned us the money. I still, to this day, I don't think that banker ever understood what we were doing, but he figured we'd pay him back, and so we just kind of kept buying deals, and then our goal was to get them to pay off as fast as possible from the royalty income, so we wouldn't live out of it. We just lived out of our day jobs and let this thing, kind of like, you know, you roll a snowball in the winter, how you just kind of roll it, and you get it going downhill, and it just kind of gets bigger and bigger. That's kind of the way this was, and then we kept buying bigger and bigger deals, and we'd pay off our earlier deals. There were months back then we didn't have like a general line of credit. Every deal stood on its own, and I remember it was like every other day I was writing a check to the bank for the monthly note payment. You know, eventually we got some of those paid off, some of those early ones paid off, and then those helped pay for the later ones. And you know, that first deal, I think it made about $200 a month, and we paid $11,000 for it, and that's how that started.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
So could you tell me how important were relationships to you while you were going through your earlier stages?
Yeah, you mean like relationships with the people I'm working with, or the people that I'm doing business with? Or?
Both.
Okay.
Both.
Yeah, so that's really important, and what you learn, and I'm going to try and make it relevant to where you guys are, you know, 21, 22 years old and getting out of school. You kind of learn that, you know, there's certain characteristics and relationships that are really important in the business world. So you may have your best friend over here who's like your best friend. Y'all been best friends since kindergarten. You know, he comes over to your house. He doesn't knock on the door. He eats whatever's in your refrigerator, and then he comes and wakes you up, whatever. And that guy is your best friend, but that doesn't mean he'd be a good business partner. You know, actually, I've probably had more business success with people that I didn't have as intimate a relationship with. It was kind of more of a professional relationship. And you learn that's kind of the way things are. You know, my wife and I have a certain relationship. My children and I have a certain relationship. My childhood friends and I have a certain relationship. But the people I do business with and I have a certain relationship. And so relationships are vitally important, you know, and the things that you would think are important are important. You know, trust, reliability, teamwork. You know, some people, it just has to be all about them. And I've probably never done very well with those sort of people. But those sort of people, you know, do great too. I mean, you know, if they, you know, you see guys all the time who do great, and they're like one-man show, and then everybody else kind of falls in line behind them. You know, a lot of our geniuses are probably like that. You know, I doubt Rockefeller had a whole bunch of buddies. You know, I don't know Elon Musk, but my hunch is he doesn't hang around with a bunch of equals. He's got people that are kind of below him or follow him or help him accomplish what he's trying to accomplish. And maybe he consults some people, but maybe he doesn't. I probably work better in a more collaborative way where, you know, I've always felt like two good minds is better than one. So a lot of times when Andy and I make a decision about a business, we'll go back and forth, and we kind of jokingly will say, you know, okay, it's your turn to be the bad guy or whatever. And if one of us hates the deal, you know, that's kind of a you know, kind of unwritten agreement we have that if one of us hates the deal, we don't do it. You know, we kind of both need to like the deal to do it together. So, but yeah, what's important? Trust, accountability, reliability. You know, some people think they need a business partner with a whole lot of money or whatever. I don't think so. You know, I think you need somebody. Well, you play football here, right? I mean, what's important? I mean, talent's important, obviously, but how important is the guy show up to practice every day? How important is it that he runs his routes every day and does the drills every day? How important is it that he's supportive and a team player? That's part of the reason I like business so much, because it does. It reminds me of sports growing up.
Like that. So, how would you identify opportunities in the market today and when you were a lot younger?
I'll just stay on the oil and gas idea. When we started, oil and gas was highly out of favor. And so, you know, oil prices when we were going in the early 90s, you know, were sometimes $9, $10, $12, $15 a barrel. And so anything you could acquire, at the time, we didn't know what oil would do. We didn't know if it was going to be $15 a barrel or what. But in the mid-90s, I took a trip overseas, and it was just one of those trips I took. I was having a pretty intense time at the law firm and decided to take a month off, and my boss let me do it, and ended up, on part of the trip I was in Malaysia, and this was 1994, and as I was traveling up from Singapore up through southern Malaysia by rail, you know, I would stare out the window and I would see that you had this country with, I don't know how many tens of millions of people. You know, to a kid from the United States in 1994, I barely knew, you know, where Malaysia was, but they had, you know, whatever, 75 million people, and a lot of them lived in a very rural, compared to the U.S., poor manner. But they had built 4-lane highways, and they were, you know, driving Mercedes and nice cars. It occurred to me that with some oil and gas and with some cheap energy, they were basically going from straw huts to driving Mercedes-Benz. And they were going to pull it off because they were so industrious and so hard-working. So I'm watching that thinking, you know, I remember making the comment when I got back. I said, you know, with this global economy, with the way people are working and trying to pull themselves out of poverty and have air conditioning for themselves, you know, that I think I said, I bet oil's going to go to $30 someday and stay there. So we were out buying all these royalties, you know, based on $12 and $15 oil. And here I'm thinking oil's going to go to 30 bucks. Of course, by the early 2000s, it's up 80, 90 bucks, $71 today. But yeah, so just little things you pick up traveling around and working. So
That's like that. How do you stay active in the industry? So I know you studied law and you did a lot of studying when you were a lot younger.
Yes.
But throughout the years, do you still go back, and how do you stay active in the industry?
yeah, so my situation's a little bit unique because I was actually practicing law in an area that was somewhat similar to the business. So that required me to stay active and fairly sharp on the subject matter. But after about 20 years, the royalty company got to the size where we didn't practice law anymore. So really, we quit practicing law for third parties a while back, and we don't do that anymore. So, you know, probably stay active on the royalty side just by doing deals and doing transactions. Although now that, you know, I'm older, we do fewer and fewer transactions. Kind of just trying to enjoy it more. We're not levered up like we used to be. Just trying to enjoy the fruits of the labor some and diversify because, you know, for any entrepreneur, and for us it was oil and gas, we had, other than our homes, we had 100% exposure to one industry, oil and gas. And oil and gas is notoriously cyclical, and it's like riding a roller coaster. And when it's up, there's nothing like it. And when it's down, it's brutal. And so about 15 years ago, we decided to try and deploy some capital and do some things to diversify our base. You know, we'd always been in the, you know, somewhat in the stock market and had some of that. We bought a little bit of an insurance company in 2010 just to kind of smooth out some of the highs and lows. We bought into what we felt was kind of a solid business. We called it hitting singles and doubles, and bought into a bank. And that was our entry into MBT.
MBT, great bank, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's say, so you said staying active. What about juggling multiple industries?
Yeah. So that's kind of fun. I mean, it helps if you have fairly high energy. It helps if you have a lot of support. I've got a great wife at home who kind of takes care of things there. I feel like I was a pretty involved father. I sat down and I counted up 27 little league teams and basketball teams and flag football teams that I'd coached over the years, and which was a lot of fun. But she keeps the train on the track at home, and so that helps. I've always had a fair amount of energy for doing things, so that helps. I love the entrepreneurial game. I love owning my own deals. I love managing our own deals. I've just always enjoyed the game. I love the transactions. I love negotiating the deals. So it really hadn't been that hard. And they're all somewhat related, because kind of the three worlds I was in, on the legal side, I was primarily focused on oil and gas. Oil and gas side, obviously, oil and gas. And now with the bank, I'm coming off of 20 years of borrowing money repeatedly. Andy and I used to joke around, whenever we first started borrowing money from banks, like, these bankers, we just don't understand them. They have all these, they ask for all this weird information. I mean, some of it's kind of makes sense. They want to see your income statements, or they want to see your tax returns. All that makes sense. They want to see your financial statement. But they always had these kind of weird rules and weird way of looking at things, and never really understood it till we got into banking. So the three of them were kind of like cousins. They were all related, so that helped. It helped it not be such a diversity. You know, a guy like Elon, I don't know how he does it, 'cause he's got, you know, he's got electric cars over here and rockets over here, and now he's got politics. So, you know, but fortunately for me, they were all kind of related, so it didn't require a whole lot of bandwidth.
Right now, I'm in a negotiations class.
Okay.
And I know you mentioned negotiating things in oil and gas and with banks. And so, how unique is it every single time you're in a room and you're negotiating?
Yeah, I don't know if you can say this in entrepreneurial class, but you know, I tell people everything you need to learn about business, you learn dating girls in high school. You know, I mean, it's just kind of all a negotiation, you know, and you know, and that's one of my favorite things. You know, I've found that most negotiations work best when both sides find some common ground. When you're not, you know, some people negotiate and they got to be the only guy who wins. And we all know those guys, and they're kind of hard to do business with. But you know, they're successful at it, and they don't want to do a deal unless they're absolutely needed and can dictate their own terms. We've had plenty of success kind of coming into deals, partnering on deals, and finding ways to kind of work together to achieve whatever we're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
But you mentioned negotiating class. I told somebody the other day, I said, I wish my wife was a psychology major and in undergrad, social work, grad school, and I took one, actually I think it was my first class at the University of Texas was Psychology 301, and I wasn't into it, and it didn't make much sense to me. The class had 500 people in it. I couldn't hear that well. I sat in the back. It didn't make any sense, and I didn't do very well, but, you know, so I focused on the business stuff. But if I had it to do over again, I think I would have taken a lot more psychology and at least paid attention to the psychology I took, because I do think that's a big part of negotiation is being able to not just read the people you're dealing with, but to understand what they're coming from and understand what's important to them. I think it's really, really important to figure out in any transaction, whether it's a banking deal or an oil and gas deal or buying your house or anything you're doing, buying a car, whatever, I think it's really important to figure out what the other guy really wants. I mean, other than just getting the deal done. Why does he want to get it done? What's important to him? How important is price? How important is it to just get the deal done? You know, some guys are compensated on commission, and they just want to get the deal done. They got wiggle room on price. Some guys, they own the deal, and price is everything. You know, so I think psychology is pay attention. That's my advice to you. Pay attention and take an extra one, because I think that'll help you long term.
Okay. I plan on paying attention to some psychology class.
I bet you're a good student.
Somewhat, you know.
Yeah.
Somewhat. Entrepreneurship involves a lot of risk taking and risk calculating. So how do you go through that in your career?
Yeah. So I would say what you have at risk is somewhat dependent on what you have. I mean, when I was young and doing deals, I didn't have anything to lose, you know. So it's easy to take risk when you don't have anything to lose or not much to lose. You know, you're just trying to get as much capital as you can, and you know, if a deal goes south, you know, you're going to pay it back, and that, you know, may take a while and it may hurt. You know, not every deal we did, even on the oil and gas side, not every deal we did was great. One deal we did, I still remember it. We paid $1,800 for it, so it was not a big deal at all. And I think the first month we made $50. The next month we made $20, and the next month it went to zero. And what we found out was in that field, that was what they called a water drive system, and the oil was here and the water was pushing it, and where that well was, that well was at the end of its economic life, and that water line was going to hit it, and when it did, that well was worth nothing. So we basically lost all of our investment, small investment, but we lost all our money on that little deal. But I tell you what, that was one of the best $1,800 lessons I could ever have, because we never made that mistake again. And so as you go through, I think you're asking me, how did I manage risk? Well, one way to manage risk is to, kind of do a variety of deals and not go all in unless you really, really know what the downside is. I talk to people all the time, and they're like, oh yeah, I've done this deal. I've never done a bad deal. I'm here to tell you, I've done lots of bad deals. I've got more bloody noses than I care to talk about, but that's how you grow. That's how you get better. We've had several deals not work out, and that's okay. We manage it by basically, in the early days, we'd sit around and go, okay, we're going to do this deal. What if it doesn't work? What does it do to what we've built thus far? Can we live through it? And if the answer is yes, then you go. If the answer is no, then you probably need a partner, or you need to buy less of it or structure it differently, something to account for that risk. And, now at the bank, we have a whole enterprise risk management committee. The banking is heavily regulated by the government, and so, they're constantly telling you, how much exposure or risk you can have to commercial real estate versus, small business loans versus mortgage versus all these things. So it's a little more organized at the banking level because it has to be. And we have a committee, and we have a chief risk officer, and she's paid to kind of help us see that and manage that. Actually, I had a group. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie, and I think the name of the movie is Margin Call. And just like when I see a movie about Texas on that Hollywood does, I'm like, oh, Hollywood, that they don't. Texas really isn't like that. So I'm sure the business world isn't like Margin Call. It has Demi Moore, but there you had this investment company that went all in on subprime mortgages and whatnot, or derivatives thereof, and bet the whole farm on it, and how they went about it, and kind of how scary that was. It almost took down their business, ended up taking down a whole bunch of their customers and ruining their reputation. So you definitely have to manage risk, but you can't be scared of it either. I mean, you can't, because when you have your opportunities, that's the thing. I mean, to me, it takes years, and no one wants to hear this when they're in college, I get it, but it takes years of practice, years of doing deals, years of making mistakes that you can live through to kind of build up. I mean, just like, you playing football in college, if you're a 6-year-old kid and you showed up to practice tomorrow and said, I'm here to play for the Texas Wesleyan Rams, you guys would kind of laugh at him like, well, you're only 6 years old, you don't have any experience, you don't know what you're doing, and if I hit you, you might die. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so business is kind of like that. And so you build up a resiliency. Through years of doing deals, you build the muscles, just like you in the weight room, or you running pass routes, or whatever. You get the experience and the training and the ability to kind of see things coming and know when you can take a risk and when you can't, and whether you can afford it, and whether you can live through it, and how to manage it if things go sideways. And yeah, so I would say, don't bet the farm right out of college. Start with deals you can manage, and allow yourself time to grow into them. Everybody's in a hurry. I talked to a guy, I must have been in my young 30s, and I was just frustrated. I've been working for whatever 10 years, and I mean I worked all the time, worked 5 days a week, worked Saturday mornings if I was in town, and wasn't making much money. And he's like, Steve, you got to understand, the income in your life is like this curve, and you're down here, and it takes a while. You got to build up, but eventually you're going to get to the point in your life where all of a sudden it just kind of comes together and things work, and you're able to kind of multiply what you earn. And he goes, and you're not going to believe it, And I'm like, I was 30 years old. And I'm like, you're just telling me that so I'll, be happy and, be encouraged. I don't believe a word you're saying, but I mean, the guy he was right. I mean, there's a lot to that.
So when was the moment where it finally clicked, or you felt like you were firing on all cylinders?
So, yeah, I would say probably in the around 10 or 15 years ago. You're kind of always doing deals, and we had the opportunity to sell a deal that we'd gotten into, and it wasn't like a company maker for us, but it basically allowed us to fast forward. Our goal was to be a certain size, certain income, certain properties at, say, age 50. And that deal, and you guys will experience the same thing as you go through and you do deals, and, you'll see opportunities. Well, that one kind of came along, and we were able to sell some things that allowed us to kind of propel, kind of fast forward 5 years quicker, than we would have otherwise. And so, again, as those opportunities come along, and the more you're in the game, the more opportunities you'll see. I had a guy, I was talking to a guy 10, 15 years older than me. This was years ago, and he gave a talk to a group of oil and gas folks. And at the time, I didn't think it was a very good talk, and he kept saying, you just got to find a way to stay in the game. You got these properties out in, whatever, Dawson County, just keep, and they're not doing well, just find a way to stay in the game. And his point was, they may be oil and gas, but maybe somebody will come in and want that land for solar panel development, or the water you're using, maybe they'll want that for something else. You just got to keep it going. Just stay in the game. That was his refrain. He just kept saying, you just got to stay in the game. And I walked out that day thinking, this guy has a great reputation. I expected more, but the longer I thought about it, I'm like, that's pretty good advice. You just got to stay in the game. You got to keep it going. Don't ever give up. Keep that, whatever asset you have or talent, just keep it going. Keep working it. And if you can keep working it and stay in the game, and living below your means is always a good idea. Good things can come along, and good things, you'll have opportunities. There's a guy that says, the harder I work, the luckier I get. And I think there's a lot of truth in that a lot of your opportunities will come along, just working hard and looking for your opportunities and learning, and never stop learning. Never, even if you're in your industry and you go, let's say you're in commercial real estate. I know everything there is in commercial real estate. I say, fine, then, go read Grapes of Wrath, go read Wuthering Heights, go, always expand always grow, always learn. Because when you quit learning, when you quit evolving, you kind of shrivel up and die mentally. So, yeah, I would encourage just always learn, always learn.
Okay, that's great advice. What are traits that you think every entrepreneur should carry with them?
Traits? Again, I think a lot of them are traits that you would pick with a friend or anything else. Integrity is huge. If you're gonna be an entrepreneur and you're gonna push an invention or a service or an idea, a barber shop, you know, a pay service on the internet, whatever, you know, you gotta have people that trust you, you know, and you've gotta have just good character. You know, character, you know, they talk about the difference between character and reputation. Reputation is what others think about you. Your character is who you are. And you got to have good character and a good reputation, because you can ruin that really quick. And the temptations will be there, you know. You'll sit there and you'll say, golly, you know, this deal's a loser, or, you know, I could push some of this loss onto this other guy or something, but I know that's not the right thing to do. Don't do it, you know. So I think character, good character, integrity are vitally important. I think communication is hugely important. You know, they say the best marriages are when, you know, the husband and the wife, they constantly, you know, kind of communicate with each other and talk to each other and let each other know what they're doing. I think the same thing's true in business. You know, if you have partners, people on your side of the fence, you know, let them know what you're thinking. Don't let a bunch of misunderstanding build up. You got to have go sick 'em. You know, if you ain't got go sick 'em, go work for somebody else. You know, if you're like, I want to be rich, but I don't want to work that hard. You know, go get a job at whatever. You know, go work for the post office, or I'm not picking on postal workers. That's not what I mean. But, you know, pick a job that is inherently not entrepreneurial. So I think you do. You have to have a little fire in the belly, a little go sick 'em, and a little appetite for risk. You know, when I started at the bank, one of the things the bank does is they give a personality test. I came home from work one day and I said, hey, the bank gave me a personality test. And my wife said, well, did you flunk it? I said, no, I didn't flunk it. I said, you know, I handed her a sheet of paper. It was about 35 words that described me. I said, here's what it said about me. She took it, she looked at it, she read it. She goes, how much you pay for this? And I said, I think the bank paid about $35. She said, I could have saved them the money and handed it back to me, you know. But I think it's good to have, to know you have the personality for it. Some people are very cautious, and that's okay. You know, a lot of people I know and work with are just cautious by nature. They're not risk takers, and that's okay. I mean, there's a role for that. Some people are very dominant. You know, they have to be in charge and whatever. And I think you see a lot of that with entrepreneurs. Some people by nature are very supportive. And so I think an entrepreneur needs those people in their life to help them, because if you're going to be an entrepreneur and be successful on a pretty high level, chances are you don't have the human energy to make it all happen yourself. And you're gonna need a team. You're gonna need people to help you, and you need to be able to recognize, you know, people who are supportive. And, you know, I found supportive people are good to have. They're good to have at home. They're good to have on your team. They're good to, you know, have in your organization. Cautious people are good to have, particularly, you know, enterprise risk management or compliance. That's a good trait to have. But yeah, I think if you're going to be the entrepreneur, you've got to have, you know, a little bit of go. What do y'all say on the football team if that guy's a dog? Or,
he's a dog. Yeah.
He's a dog. Yeah, you got to have a little dog in
A
you.
little dog in you.
Yeah, a little bit, I would think.
Some bark to you.
Yeah.
You served in various leadership roles at the Fort Worth Petroleum Club. How was your experience with that?
It was good. So, you know, you end up, you know, as you go through life, and you end up serving on what I call non-paying jobs. You know, you end up serving on boards that were, you know, because there's just a lot of organizations that they have boards, need boards, whether it's a church or a school or, in that case, Petroleum Club. You know, I think it's important to serve, and I think it's important to give. I think you need to, as much as I like to do deals, and, you know, the consequence of those when they work out is making money. So, and I enjoy that part. I do. But I think it's also important to give back and to donate, not just your time, but your money. Because, at some level, either you have the money or the money has you. And so for me, kind of the best way to make sure that the money doesn't have me is to not grip it too tight and to be willing to give some away. And so board activity is good. A lot of those boards, quite frankly, sometimes they're good because you're interacting with other people that are in your sphere of influence, or you wish they were. They're good connections to make. But unless you're, feeding starving children or something, a lot of them, you're not feeding starving children. So, you don't get too caught up in it. You're just kind of, serving on a board, and then you kind of rotate through and you do your duty for free or whatever. But they're good, and if you are a successful entrepreneur, people will see that and people will ask you to do those things. Pick the ones you think you might have an interest in, and I would just tell you, if you don't have an interest in it, just say no. It's okay to say no. But if you do, then, and I did, because the Petroleum Club had a lot of good oil and gas people in it. St. Paul at the church, I had kids in the school, so I was interested in that board and enjoyed that service. But yeah, that's just kind of part of it as you grow older, and that's just part of your network.
Okay. So you mentioned resilience, and I want to see how important it is to incorporate that throughout hard times. And how did you incorporate that?
Yeah, and there were hard times. I mean, there were nights when I didn't sleep much, just out of worry. Yeah, I mean, you do have to be resilient. You do have to have some toughness. Fortunately, I had good support, good wife, and good home situation. That's important to have. I'm a Christian, so I think it's important to have a relationship with Jesus and know that no matter what happens, at the end of the day, He's going to take care of you and not leave you and forsake you. So that's always been a comfort to me. As I've gotten older and look back on it, I kind of giggle sometimes at the things I was scared about or nervous about. I was like, oh my gosh, I was so worked up. I was so scared about that or so concerned about that. And now looking back on it 10 years later, you almost laugh at it, But yeah, I mean, it requires some resilience. I mean, anything you're going to do, face it, anything you do worthwhile requires, it's one thing to play in the regular season. How much does it take to get down to the end and play in the playoffs? I mean, you kind of reach down for, kick it into a different gear, and you do the same thing in business. But the harder you work and the tougher times you go through, the better you do. My daughter, I was taking her to school this morning, and we were talking about famous presidents, and I said, what do you notice about, George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Roosevelt? What do the well-known presidents have in common? And we were talking about it, and I said, they went through a really tough time. Whether it was the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War II, they went through a really tough time, and that brought out, their greatness. So I'm not comparing, your entrepreneurial experience to that. I'm just saying, tough times, if you fight through them and come out the other side, you'll be a lot better person. You'll be a better business person. You'll be a better person. You'll be able to do more things. You'll have a higher level of confidence. So, in the heat of the moment, it's sometimes hard to say, oh, thank you, God, for giving me this very challenging situation. Most of us are human. Reply to that, our human nature says, oh, I'd give anything if this horrible situation would go away. But you know, I have the benefit of looking back at it now after decades of work, and you know, the harder times are when I grew the most, and that's what you want to do. So I don't relish those times. I'm glad when they're over, but yeah, they're important. And that's just part of it. And no matter what you do, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, whether you're a parent or not, whether you go to where everybody has tough spells. But I would venture to say that most people my age would say the same thing, which is you get through them, you don't want to do them again, but you're kind of glad it happened and glad you made it through and glad for the lessons you learned from going through it. But there you go.
Do you have a deal that you deem as your best deal ever?
Best deal ever? I don't know. We had some really good deals that worked out. You know, we did we've done deals. I've been part of a deal that was $10. And I've been part of a deal that was over $800 million. So, and a lot in between. You know, bigger deals are fun and exciting and great and memorable. But I still remember a lot of the small deals we did. You know, one of the most fun deals we ever did, we bought Andy and I together, we bought and we didn't have enough money, so this deal was a old abandoned gas station, and it had leaky underground storage tanks. So it was a super fun site. It was an environmental problem. And the guy who owned it had borrowed the money from the bank, from not our bank, from a different bank years ago, and put this property up as collateral, and the bank should not have foreclosed on it, but they did. And so they needed to get it off their books, and so they were willing to sell it cheap. And so who's willing to buy a stinky old leaky former gas station that was on a pretty good corner? So we created a single purpose entity, put this asset in it. It's the only asset in this entity, so that if anything bad happened, if the government came after us, and the government was in the process of cleaning it up. That's what gave us the comfort to do it, was that the government had come in, and the former owner didn't have the ability to clean it up, so the government had said, you know, we're in the process of cleaning it up. They drilled wells, and they were out there cleaning it up. And so we bought it, and then we rented it out to a guy. I think he was selling used cars out of it. And so, and I want to say, Nick, I mean, I want to say that deal was like $75,000, and we didn't have the money for it. So we got an investor in there for like $25,000 or something, just because we didn't have the money to do the deal. And we rented it for 3 or 4 or 5 years and got most of our money back, and then we sold it for 5 times what we paid for it. So, you know, I mean, I don't know why I remember that, just because it was kind of a fun deal to work on. You know, we didn't know what we were doing, you know, with that thing being an environmental problem and having those problems, but it was a whole lot of fun, and you know, in hindsight, it wasn't even, you know, it was never one of a big deal, but it was just a fun deal to work on, and you know, we ended up with about a 5 or 6x out of that deal. So,
Great
you know, in
return.
5 years. So it didn't move the needle much, but it was just kind of a fun deal to work on.
I got something interesting for you. What do you feel about? I got you. I think we're gonna have to. I got you.
Just start from that sentence that you was about to start at.
Okay. I'm gonna ask you about AI.
Do what?
I'm about to ask you about AI.
Oh, boy, I don't, this will be short.
This will be short. Okay, I'm just gonna say, business is gonna ask you, how do you feel about AI? And then, but in like 2 seconds, we have to redo it. We have to like restart.
Okay.
So, 5, 4. How do you feel about AI?
I don't know a lot about AI. I mean, obviously, I type on my phone, and when it does spell check, I know that's AI. I've asked AI to do a few fun things on chat.
GBT.
Yeah, and I've done some of that. I think it will change our world. I think it is going to take over a lot of tasks that we do, but in a way that, I mean, you think about it, we have machines today that do things that we used to do. I mean, we used to build cars by hand. Now we have machines that do that. We used to go to McDonald's and order a milkshake. Now you go to the kiosk and put it in. I mean, they even have machines that flip the burgers now. So, I mean, that's where we're headed. I mean, it's inevitable, and you might as well embrace the technology. It's wonderful that, we don't have to do all the sweaty, dirty work that, our grandparents used to have to do. It'll be a pretty big part of the banking world, for both good and bad, because the good guys will have it and the bad guys will have it. Looking for, the bad guys will use it to try and, back in the olden days, they used to ride around with guns and hold up a bank, and now they do it through computers, and the good guys will use it to look for the bad guys. So I think it's part of the brave new world that's coming. It's inevitable. I don't, some people are like, oh, we need to hold it back. You can try if you want. I don't think you're going to. I just think that's where we're headed, so we might as well embrace it, learn how to handle it, and yeah, I wish I could, figure out a way to invest in the right chip manufacturers or whatever to take full advantage of it. But with my background and experience, I'm probably not going to be on the forefront of AI.
Okay. And last question here. What is one thing you want to leave the audience with, like a last piece of advice that you think would last a lifetime?
I wish I could say, assuming my audience is entrepreneurs and guys who, they want to build a business, or they want to make a lot of money, or they want to be successful or whatever. The fundamentals hadn't changed. In 100 years, they haven't changed. It's still a lot of work, a lot of honesty, a lot of teamwork, a lot of, integrity, all the things I talked about. It's a lot of get yourself experience, look for opportunities. And when you see your opportunity, you got to be ready and willing to jump on it. There's a thought out there that, there's people, you'll get opportunity, but you won't be ready for it, or you'll be ready for it, but you won't get your opportunity. But I'd say spend your life try and find something that that you enjoy, but don't get too caught up in enjoying it. There's a reason it's called work, and not that you got to pick something that's just absolutely miserable, but it's okay if you're 22 years old and not pursuing your passion. Try and figure out what interests you and what you want to do. And if you're not sure, it's okay to go work for somebody else and let them train you up for 5 or 6 years. Let's say you're an accounting guy and you want to start a hedge fund, but you don't know how. It's okay to go work for somebody for a few years. I tell young people all the time that as you're starting out, if you don't know exactly what you want to do, if you don't know that you want to go build spaceships for a living, then go work for a bigger company and work hard and learn a breadth of things to do, and then as you get older, move up through smaller companies, and then after 2 or 3 moves, now you're at a smaller company, you know what you're doing, you know, and you're valuable to someone. So I think if you're not sure what you're doing or where you're headed, that's kind of just a good broad way to think about going forward or how to get started. But try and, you know, I had a neighbor tell me when I was a law student, he said, Steve, get really good at something. And I'm like, well, you know, I'm going to UT Law School, you know. He goes, no, get really good at something. And the point he was trying to make was that, you know, find a specialty that you're really good at. Because if you're good at a specialty that's valuable to other people, then that has value. And people will pay you for that. And then you'll find ways to kind of apply it in the marketplace. So anything you do, you know, get really good at it. If you're not sure, it's okay to work at a bigger place and kind of learn your skills, and then, but always kind of keep your eye open for your opportunity. And then when it comes, you've got to take it. You'll know it when you see it, but you've got to take it. Don't be scared, and have your life in order so that you can do that. Don't have a lot of debt. Don't go borrow every penny you can on the most expensive car your day after you graduate. You know, try and live below your means. Keep your risk down, you know, so that when you do get your opportunity, you have the ability to seize it.
Perfect. Thank you so much for coming out here today.
All right. Thanks for having me, Nick.
Appreciate you.
Okay.